Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of the Valley View. And I'm joined this week with Gareth Hughes from New Zealand. He's a member of Parliament in the New Zealand Parliament. So welcome to the show, Gareth.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So what are you doing here in the States, and in Salem in particular?
Yeah, well, I'm here on a energy and IT study tour. I try and every year get a little bit of international perspective on the issues I'm developing policy and working on. So I'm in San Francisco, Seattle, Oregon, and then off to the Rocky Mountain Institute next to look at where can we reform policy around energy issues to make sure it's cleaner but also affordable.
And so the Rocky Mountain Institute, that's the one that the author of Soft Energy Paths, is that?
I'm not sure of that book, but I think you're talking about Amory Lovins.
Yes.
He wrote a great book called Fire as well.
Yeah, I originally read his book Soft Energy Paths. Yeah, and that was many years ago.
Well, Amory and the Institute really have been at the forefront of energy thinking for a long time, and it's a big challenge for New Zealand. We've still got a dirty fleet releasing climate-causing emissions. Our electric network could be 100% but isn't. We've got huge opportunities that we're not taking. So I'm looking at policy ideas from around the States, and we'll take them back home with me.
So what kind of like wind and wave power and things like that?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, wave power is a sad tale from New Zealand.
I didn't know about this.
Well, we're an ocean superpower. We're
right.
Not a superpower in many respects, but we've got the fourth largest exclusive economic zone in the world, one of the longest coastlines in the world. We could be tapping it to make energy, and in fact we've been pioneering some research, but because of a lack of support and funding and other things, the New Zealand equipment designed to produce power from the waves is currently in Oregon being bought and trialled here. So sadly we didn't support wave energy, so it's great to hear what Oregon's doing and what the US government's doing, actually funding wave energy, because it's a potential way to produce a vast amount of unlimited clean energy.
So, and you mentioned IT as well? So that's kind of interesting connection there, I guess. But what kind of things in Oregon did you learn about IT, or was that mostly in San Francisco?
It was mostly in San Francisco and Seattle, where I spent some time with Microsoft. But IT is New Zealand's third biggest export earner. So I was spending time with some of the New Zealand companies based there that are breaking into the US market or selling products or services. So from a green perspective, it's a better way to grow jobs and prosperity than, say, the traditional model in New Zealand, which has been to cram cows on paddocks and
sheep.
And sheep, trying to mine minerals. IT, there's no limit to the amount of low carbon solutions or jobs we could be creating. And
you have a movie industry now too.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone knows about New Zealand, thanks to Sir Peter Jackson. I guess the problem is Tolkien stopped writing books, so there's no more Hobbit films to make, so we've got to look for something else. But we do have a thriving film and TV sector. A lot of games that people might play come out of New Zealand, so as someone who cares passionately about the tech sector in New Zealand, it's something I'd like to see the national narrative of my country not just be mountains and hobbits and cows. We're a tech-savvy nation, and coming up with solutions for the next century. So my portfolios in Parliament are energy, IT, science, innovation, broadcasting, tertiary education, skills and employment. So they're actually quite a nice complementary bundle. So
New Zealand has a different kind of system for electing representatives, and you have a parliamentary system. Could you explain how that works, and especially in relationship to the Green Party and some of the other parties? How many major parties do you have in New Zealand, for starters?
Depends how you define major. We've got 7 parties in our parliament. We've got a Conservative Party, a left-wing party, the Green Party, which is the third party, a sort of populist nationalist party who's got about 10 seats, we've got 14, the government has 59, and then there's, 3 other micro parties that have either 1 or 2 members. So unlike the US or Australia or Britain, we're unicameral, which means we don't have an upper house. There's no Senate or House of Lords. we've just got a parliament and the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, similar to your Cabinet secretaries, are the executive who run the government and take legislation or spending proposals to Parliament. And we've only got 3-year terms, but the big change for us was that we went through a massive period of economic reform, revolution really, from how fast the change was in the 80s and 90s. And because of our single House of Parliament, a law could be passed in an afternoon, changing everything about the country and society, and it did happen. So the public in the 90s wanted some checks and balances, and that's when we moved to our mixed member proportional electoral system, which is similar to, say, Germany or Israel. And basically what happens now, instead of like in the States where a couple of key states determine who's the president, in our past it was a couple of key constituencies would change the government. Now every single vote counts, and if the Green Party, as we did, get 11% of the vote, we get 11% of the seats in Parliament. And I guess just to finish, what it has meant is that more people are represented in Parliament. There's more women, more Indigenous people. I used to be the youngest member, more young people. It's meant our House of Representatives is a lot more representative. And I guess unlike Canada or Britain, without these fairer proportional electoral systems, it has been hard to get a Green perspective there. And I guess this is what you're facing with the Green
Well,
Party in
this
the
is
US.
a very difficult thing here in the United States because you have to win to even get a seat in Congress. And that is pretty daunting because, for one thing, like in the presidential election, the two parties control who's in the debates. And it makes it very difficult to break through that.
Yep.
And for the most part, because people think, well, they have no chance of winning, they don't get covered in the paper, they don't hear too much about the policies and so on. But one of the interesting things, and you were mentioning this about New Zealand, is that when you have a certain portion of registered voters, you get money for running your candidates. So maybe you could explain a little bit how that works.
I guess it's a hybrid model. Personally, I'd prefer state funding of election campaigns because I believe voting should be about the issues, about the ideas, the interplay of visions for the future. Unfortunately, it is a battle for dollars, and we do know that money impacts elections, and you can see that very clearly in the US. But so we've got a mixed model where we are dependent on fundraising. We are dependent to put up billboards or produce materials on donations. But we've got state funding for TV broadcasts. So this means we can't, actually it's illegal for any party to purchase TV ads, but through a allocation formula, we're given X amount of dollars to spend on TV. So I believe we got about $1 million of TV advertising spend based on our previous votes and polling and a few other metrics.
And so do you create campaign ads? Like normally they're like 30 or 60 seconds here in the States.
Yep.
Is that what you do there? Or do you have something else that you do?
No, I mean, putting ads on is a big part of the campaign. More your sort of 15 to 30 second ad. Online advertising has become a lot more important for us. In New Zealand, more people are watching, Netflix or YouTube than they are the traditional TV broadcasters. So that's seen a bigger spend for us than ads. But under New Zealand election law, there's what's called an opening broadcast and a closing broadcast. So when the election campaign starts, every political party is given X minutes of free television time to do with this as they want, and there's a equivalent one at the end. We also have a big number of debates across the year.
And also you have a rather short campaign period. How long does it last in New Zealand?
Well, because we have a 3-year political cycle, basically we campaign for 3 years.
Oh,
but
okay.
I guess the campaign period is only about 6 weeks.
So that, and how do they, is it at the same time all the time? I mean, like here in the States, we always vote in November. Is it similar to that?
No, it's up to the Prime Minister. There is law when it can and can't be, but effectively it's a political decision that he makes and tries to get one on the opposition by being a bit tricky with the date and keeping his cards close to his chest. Traditionally, though, it's around sort of September, October, November.
So he'll try to make it so, like, when they're doing well in the polls, and just pull it out and say, well, we're going to have an election in 90 days or whatever.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that in the past. But also, if they know the date, they can spend all year preparing for it, but the opposition is unprepared for the date, so can't have pre-booked advertising or all these sorts of things. But, having a 3-year political cycle is really short. What it has meant is that we often get the same party forming multiple governments. 3 years isn't a huge amount of time to change things. So there's a bit of a movement to lengthen that.
So what are the main issues in New Zealand? What are the Green Party initiatives to try to? I would imagine that they're mostly environmental, but I know here in the States that it expands to a lot of other things as well. But what are the major issues confronting New Zealand, and what is the Green Party's outlook on those?
Yeah, well, I think the major issues are economic, societal. We've got the fastest growing inequality in the developed world over the last few years. And then climate change. Our emissions are increasing at a time when our pollution should be decreasing. But something that unites Green Parties around the world is we've got the Green Party Charter, which unites the Green Parties in dozens and dozens of countries with political representation. So protecting the planet, ecological wisdom, social justice, non-violence and appropriate decision making. So it's for me it's a bit of a touchstone to know that I'm united as part of a global movement. But in terms of the domestic political debate, we're focused on housing. We're seeing a housing crisis emerge, a huge bubble of speculation. Housing's unaffordable, particularly for my generation. Terrible quality of housing resulting in sick kids. We've got kids growing up in poverty, which is a tragedy. And then environmentally, we've got a crisis with our waterways. Unfortunately, about 2/3 of our streams and rivers are unsafe to swim in because of agricultural pollution. So we've got good policies to clean those up, and part of our focus of the last 5-10 years has been highlighting our economic vision. Often that's been the domain of the Conservatives, saying they've got the economic credibility, but that's something we've really brought, that we've got a better plan to grow jobs.
So you've got a housing crisis, and what is driving the housing crisis? You mentioned rising prices, but is that because you have a expanding population, or what's going on then?
Yeah, it's a mix of things going on. We do have the highest migration we've seen in decades and decades. So we've got more people coming in. We're not building as many houses as we once did. The state, the government's actually moved out of their traditional role, which is building a lot of houses in New Zealand. They're actually selling the state housing stock currently. But also, I think another thing that unites New Zealand and the US is we don't have a capital gains tax, or maybe it's only some states don't have a capital gains tax. So what you see is a lot of people investing their money in housing instead of investing in, say, a productive business or something else. So what we see is people speculating in the housing market, and it's just built itself into a bubble, which has got huge problems because people are locked out. People are sleeping in their cars and on the streets, which is a phenomenon which we're not used to in New Zealand.
Well, yes, from what I understand, that if I remember that I had a sister-in-law, and she was always able to get housing, but this was like 30, 40 years ago. But that evidently is not the case anymore. But it was one of the things that I thought was good was that even though she was like a single mother, it wasn't like she was in dire straits. And I always kind of felt like that was a much more humane situation that you had in New Zealand. But from what you're saying, it's not the same anymore.
Yeah, it's changing, and Look, as a foreign observer, it's heartbreaking for me to see so many homeless in the States. In downtown San Francisco, it was just heartbreaking to see those, personal tragedies all around. We are seeing more of it, and New Zealand, we've been a leader in so many respects, from being the first country to give women the vote with universal suffrage, through to declaring ourselves nuclear free in the 1980s. We also were one of the most egalitarian nations in the world. We pioneered some of the welfare state provisions in the 1930s. This is the sort of vision I have for my country, which is to be a leader in terms of social justice, protecting the environment, and sadly we're not doing that at the moment, but that's our political challenge as a Green Party, is to articulate our policies and our vision and continue to grow our vote.
So as a young member of Parliament, you could have a very long career.
I'm not aiming to have
a career
in politics. Look, my entire adult life's been around trying to protect the environment. That's my passion. I worked for Greenpeace for about 10 years before I entered Parliament, so my whole life's been about trying to bring good progressive change, and you can do that on the outside and you can do it on the inside. I'm looking forward to one day going back and doing it from the outside as well.
Well, that's good to hear, because sometimes people get locked into it almost as a profession. And I think you need to get out periodically and live like everybody else. I mean, it's a real divide here in this country between people that are members of Congress, or even like state assemblies or state representatives, and people that work for a living. And so it does quite often create a divide, I think, in how people view things. When they get into office and they're there for long, long periods of time.
Yeah, I was actually listening to a podcast recently that looked at the size elected representatives served of their constituencies, and India was number one, a million people per representative. The US, I think, was up near the top, so
yes.
It's almost impossible, I imagine, for an individual citizen to have a relationship or even a contact with their, say, Congress person.
Well, it is very difficult. Plus, I always thought it was kind of odd that, like, you've got one representative, okay, and if you're a member of, like, say, the opposition party or a minor party, it's very hard to get any kind of influence. I mean, they'll listen to you, or their staff will, but I mean, it's not like it's taken seriously a lot of times. And I just found that kind of one of the drawbacks is that you might have an individual representative, but it might not be somebody you can go to and try to get something done as a policy issue. Now, sometimes if you've got a problem with, say, your veterans benefits or something else, they might be able to help you out and like that, negotiate through the bureaucracy. But as far as policy or
Right.
issues, you have almost no say. And that's, to me, one of the real drawbacks to having the winner-take-all kind of electoral process, where it's black-white, on, off, any way you want to describe it. And so, like, in parliamentary systems, you might have somebody that wins enough seats that they don't need to listen to any of the other parties, but quite often they have to form coalitions with other parties, which then means that you might get a cabinet post in energy or something else, so that you build up more credentials or more experience in actually administering things, not just as a representative.
And that's been our respect. We've constantly had coalition governments since we changed electoral systems, and it's meant our lawmaking slowed down, so we're producing better quality law. It's meant more voices are heard, and there's a more collaborative, constructive approach in terms of politics. Whereas here it seems if the Democrats propose it, the Republicans oppose.
That's what you're getting nowadays. That's exactly what's happening.
But I wanted to ask, what's your sense of the chance of electoral reform in the US? Has there been much work on it?
No. I don't see it anyway. And one of the things that I think happens in this country is both parties kind of fear-monger the other one. And especially, like, even with minor party they're trying to scare you so bad that you vote, for the one that's a little bit closer to your way of looking at things. And it doesn't create good policy. It doesn't help you work out issues. And that's something that's changed over like the last 30, 40 years. And I can remember when I was in college, and we're going back a long way now, that I had a Republican teacher, and he was on like a city council, and he later became a state assembly person. And he was very reasonable. You could talk to him. In fact, we would quite often have conversations after class, a bunch of us talking, and he would listen to you and point things out to you and like that. And so like there was kind of some give and take. Right now it's just like, it's almost like sloganeering back and forth at each other. There's no real discussion going on. And I think that's one of the big problems. And so I think people are getting very frustrated because nothing then is happening. Things aren't working one way or the other. They're just gridlocked with really nothing. None of the major issues in this country are being addressed. And you brought up global warming, and you still have one party that's basically denying that it's happening. Yeah. And the other party figures that people that are serious about it really don't have any place else to go, so they don't really address the issues, and they just try to make themselves look better, and they don't do anything about it. So I think at some point people are going to just get so frustrated that I don't know what's going to happen. You have people like Donald Trump come up, who does kind of a populist kind of attitude toward things. It appeals to some people and gets people thinking, oh, he's going to make things better, but then he's not going to be able to deliver. Because you still have this system where people are not trying to work out the problems about how to get things done. Instead, they're just kind of, like I say, sloganeering back and forth at each other. And so I think the system's going to have to break down. I think the parties will break apart at some point. I think there's a real chance that the Republican Party will just implode.
Maybe sooner than later?
Yeah, I think there's a real good chance the Republican Party will implode after this election. And I don't think the Democrats will be far behind, because they have their own set of problems where they're not addressing the issues that most people are concerned about.
Yeah, and we're seeing this around the developed world as well. The social democratic parties, the left, more progressive parties, are seeing a challenge. So you've got conservatives in the US and Australia and New Zealand, and a declining vote for the social democratic party. So it's a big challenge for them. This is why I'm a Green, though, because you look through history and all the isms, the neoliberalism, Keynesianism, communism, socialism, liberalism. Greens are something different. We look at some of the things from history and heritage, but it's a new global movement which actually says at its heart, we live on a finite planet. We've got to live within our means, and we've got to think globally in terms of climate change or other issues. So other parties have got their problems, but I'm glad to be part of the solution.
Yeah, and like global warming's part of it, but like I think one of the reasons why we're having so many problems is that for decades we've relied on cheap energy to make us be able to expand and like that. And I remember reading an article, and this is probably about 10, 15 years ago, that here in the United States, the items on your dinner plate traveled 1,500 miles to get there. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, we live in Oregon, which is one of the best farming places in the entire American West, and we've got things traveling 1,500 miles. That is crazy. So we also have the end of what I think is cheap energy, and that's going to cause a whole lot of change. And here in Salem, they're talking about building another bridge across the river to make it easier for people to get across the river, rather than supporting public transportation. We get everybody in their own little individual car going across. And I just think that those things are unsustainable. And how much longer can people not see what's happening to them?
Well, it's a political choice what we do with it, but we can't negotiate with the brute reality of the facts, which is physics and maths. We just can't negotiate with it. So it's happening. There are finite natural limits. We're going to keep innovating, and technology will go some of the way. But you're right, facing the end of cheap oil, we've got to come up with better solutions, and public transport makes more livable cities, which are nicer places to be, brings people together, and obviously is cleaner and cheaper. I'm personally very excited about electric vehicles to help reduce emissions. In New Zealand, we could be 100% clean electricity, so we could have a transport fleet running on electricity, be it the trains, the buses, and our cars. So it's not for want of solutions, I think it's for want of political will. And I learned today that your average Oregonian, is that how you
Yes,
pronounce
Oregonian.
it?
Oregonian.
Oregonian. Drives almost double the average New Zealander, and I thought we drove a lot.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you probably noticed it when you went to California that that's even worse. And see, I remember making a conscious decision that I didn't want to live further away from my home to work than it would take me to walk in about 45 minutes.
Yep.
Because, and this happened to me a couple of times. I worked midnight to 8 in the morning, and my car wouldn't start. Well, it's dark. You can't see what you're doing. There's no garage open for you to get it fixed. So I always figured that I'd rather just be a little bit late to work rather than not show up. And so I wanted to be able to walk to work or bike. And so I made that decision. It kind of changed how I saw things and then it got to the point where, well, I don't need to drive over to here. Maybe I should look at a place where I don't have to drive so much. And that's why, frankly, I ended up here in Salem, because I don't have to. The very few places that I go in Salem that are more than, like, say, 2-3 miles, and most of those I could walk or bike to very easily.
I'm exactly the same. I've always lived somewhere where I'm walking distance, and I feel so fortunate that I get to walk to our national parliament every day for work, so I can live close by. And I'm probably of a similar generation to yours, though, that as soon as I could, I got my license. As soon as I could, I bought my car to drive around. But I noticed today a lot of younger Americans and New Zealanders, they're not interested in a license and a car. They want to be close to town where the action and the culture is. You know, they want to be able to be on their devices and stay connected, so they want to use good quality public transport. So I feel like I'm maybe one of the last car-centric. But we never had solutions when I was growing up. That we didn't have high-quality buses. We didn't have light rail and other options. And if you don't provide it, people don't know what they're missing out on.
Yeah, and I think, see, the car culture tends to spread things out because you can only have so many cars in a small area like a downtown. But
and this is the interesting thing, is that this is where the economic critique of the Greens is actually being borne out. It's less efficient, it's less wealth generating, so it's bad economics as well as bad for the environment and bad for societies.
Well, Gareth, we could probably go on for a while, but we're about out of time. So I want to thank you for dropping by and visiting with us. And this has been The Valley View.
Thank you very much.